Everyone in that courtroom thought I was naive. Julian smirked, holding his mistress who wore the Patek Philippe bought with my parents' retirement savings. They thought signing away a $50 million company was my defeat, but they didn't know that in 72 hours, the FBI and SEC would come knocking. That signature wasn't a loss. It was my get-out-of-jail-free card. This is how I made him serve a 20-year prison sentence in my place. My name is Aurora Waverly, and on the morning my marriage officially ended, I was the only person in the room with a steady heart rate. The air inside the King County Superior Court smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Outside, the Seattle gray was doing its usual heavy press against the glass. A constant drizzle that blurred the skyline, but inside Department 4, everything was sharp, bright, and painfully exposed under the fluorescent lights. I sat at the mahogany table with my hands folded in my lap. I wore a simple charcoal blazer over a white blouse, an outfit chosen specifically to look unremarkable, to disappear across the aisle. My husband, Julian Thorne, was vibrating with an energy that looked like confidence to everyone else but looked exactly like desperation to me. Julian was 35 years old, but today he was trying very hard to look like the 20-something wonder boy the tech blogs had fallen in love with 3 years ago. He was wearing a navy Armani suit that cost more than my first car, the fabric shimmering slightly under the lights. His hair was perfectly coiffed, a deliberate, messy style that took his stylist 45 minutes to achieve. He sat with his legs crossed, one foot tapping a frantic rhythm against the leg of the table. Tap, tap, tap. It was the only tell he had left. To the world, he was the visionary CEO of Thorne & Company, a fintech unicorn poised to disrupt the banking industry. To me, he was a man who had mortgaged his soul to buy a facade. Next to him sat Bella. It was almost impressive how little shame she possessed. At 24, Bella was the newly appointed Chief Marketing Officer of my husband's company, a title she had earned primarily by being willing to sleep with the CEO and secondarily by knowing how to use TikTok filters. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that was technically appropriate for court, but fit her tight enough to be a statement. She wasn't looking at the judge. She wasn't looking at the lawyers. She was holding her phone just below the edge of the table, her thumb scrolling rapidly. I knew, with absolute certainty, that she was live-streaming updates to her close friends list, or perhaps even publicly, on her left wrist, catching the harsh overhead light, sat a Patek Philippe Nautilus. I stared at the watch. It was rose gold. It was beautiful. And it had been purchased 6 weeks ago using the liquidation of my parents' IRA, an account Julian had convinced me to move under his management for better yield, just before he locked me out of the system. Seeing it on her wrist didn't make me angry. Anger is a hot emotion. Anger makes you sloppy. What I felt was a cold, clinical detachment. It was like watching a specimen in a jar. Mrs. Thorne, the judge's voice cut through the room. Judge Harrison was a woman in her late 60s with eyes that had seen every variation of marital collapse imaginable. She looked tired. "We are here to finalize the dissolution of marriage between you and Mr. Thorne. I have the settlement agreement in front of me. Have you reviewed it?" "I have, Your Honor," I said. My voice was low, steady, and devoid of tremors. Julian's lawyer, a man named Sterling who charged $800 an hour to be aggressively condescending, leaned forward. He had the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice booming as if he were addressing a jury rather than a procedural hearing, "my client has been exceedingly generous. Despite Mrs. Thorne's lack of contribution to the founding or operation of Thorne & Company, Mr. Thorne has agreed to a swift settlement to avoid dragging this out. We believe the terms are more than fair given the disparity in financial acumen." He paused to let that insult land. I didn't blink. "Let's review the asset division," Judge Harrison said, adjusting her glasses. She looked down at the paperwork, her eyebrows knitting together as she read. "According to this, Mr. Thorne is to retain 100% ownership of Thorne & Company, including all intellectual property, future patents, and subsidiary holdings." "Correct," Sterling said. Mr. Thorne is to retain the primary residence on Lake Washington, the judge continued, as well as the vacation property in Aspen and the investment portfolio held at Vanguard. Correct. And Mrs. Thorne, the judge looked up, her gaze shifting to me. There was confusion in her eyes now. Mrs. Thorne is to receive full physical and legal custody of the minor child. Mia Thorne, she will retain the 2016 Volvo XC90 and a one-time cash settlement of $25,000. The silence that followed was heavy. $25,000. It was an insult. It was less than the cost of the furniture in Julian's office. It was less than the watch on his mistress's wrist. In a community property state like Washington, I was entitled to half of the $50 million valuation, half of the house, half of the life we had built. Sterling cleared his throat. My client feels that since he was the sole generator of wealth during the marriage, and since Mrs. Thorne has been out of the workforce for 5 years, this arrangement reflects the reality of their contributions. Furthermore, Mr. Thorne is graciously declining to contest custody, acknowledging that a mother's place is with her child. Graciously, I repeated the word in my head. Julian turned to look at me then. He flashed that famous smile, the one that had charmed venture capitalists and magazine editors. He leaned over the empty chair between us, encroaching on my space. It is for the best, Aurora, he whispered, loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough to escape the court reporter's microphone. You know you are not cut out for this world. You are not on my level. You never were. I looked at him. I looked at the way his hand gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles white. I saw the bead of sweat trapped in his hairline. He was terrified I would say no. He was terrified I would demand an audit. He needed this divorce finalized today because he was in the middle of a Series C funding round, and no investor wanted to put money into a company with a messy legal battle pending. He needed to own everything so he could leverage everything. He thought he was stripping me of my assets. He didn't realize he was stripping himself of his shield. Aurora, Julian corrected himself, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Just sign it. Take the Volvo. Take Mia. Go live a simple life. It is what you are good at. You do not understand the pressure of the empire I am building. I am doing you a favor. I am letting you walk away clean. Mr. Thorne, the judge warned. Please address the court, not the respondent. Julian straightened his jacket, looking smug. Apologies, Your Honor. I just want to ensure my ex-wife understands that I'm trying to take care of her, despite everything. Judge Harrison turned her full attention to me. She looked at the papers, then back at me. She was giving me an out. She was waiting for me to scream, to cry, to demand a lawyer who wasn't asleep at the wheel. Mrs. Thorne, the judge said slowly, I want to be absolutely clear. You are waiving your right to equitable distribution. You are walking away from a marital estate valued in the tens of millions of dollars. You are accepting a settlement that represents less than 1% of the total assets. Do you understand what you are signing? The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. I could hear the scratching of the stenographer's machine. Bella stopped scrolling on her phone. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. She wanted me to fight. She wanted the drama. She wanted to be the victim of a crazy ex-wife so she could post about it later. I took a breath. I thought about the files encrypted on the hard drive sitting in my bank safety deposit box. I thought about the emails Julian had sent to his offshore accounts. I thought about the tax fraud, the inflated user numbers, the Ponzi-like structure of the new investment capital paying off the old debts. If I took half the company, I took half the liability. If I fought for the assets, I became an accomplice. I understand, Your Honor, I said. The judge frowned. Mrs. Thorne, I strongly advise you to reconsider. This agreement is highly unusual. If you sign this, you cannot come back later and claim you were coerced. You are legally stating that you are satisfied with this division of property. I am satisfied, I said, and for the first time, I allowed a small smile to touch my lips. I just want it to be over. I want peace for my daughter. Julian is right. He built that company. He deserves everything that comes with it." Julian let out a breath he had been holding for 20 minutes. His shoulders dropped. He exchanged a look with Sterling, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. They thought I was broken. They thought I was stupid. "Very well," Judge Harrison said, though she clearly disapproved. "If both parties are in agreement, and there are no further objections, you may sign." The clerk pushed the heavy document toward me. It was thick, bound with a metal clip. I flipped to the back page. There was Julian's signature, bold and sweeping, taking up 2 lines. He had signed it 10 minutes ago with a Mont Blanc pen he kept in his breast pocket. I picked up the cheap plastic ballpoint pen provided by the court. I didn't hesitate. I didn't shake. I wrote Aurora Waverly in clear cursive script. With that signature, I legally transferred full ownership of Thorne & Company to Julian. With that signature, I transferred the title of the Lake Washington house and the 3 mortgages attached to it to Julian. With that signature, I transferred the responsibility for the upcoming SEC filings to Julian. And most importantly, by signing the specific clause on page 47, the one my incompetent lawyer had quietly inserted and Julian had been too arrogant to read closely, I affirmed that Julian Thorne was the sole operator and decision-maker of the business, releasing me from any and all liability regarding its past, present, and future financial conduct. I put the pen down. "It is done," the judge said, banging her gavel. "The divorce is final. Good luck to you both." Julian stood up immediately. He didn't look at me. He turned to Bella and pulled her into a hug that was performative and excessive. "We did it," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "We are free." "Finally," Bella said. Smoothing her dress, she glanced at me, smirking. "Bye, Aurora. Enjoy the Volvo." They walked out of the courtroom like they were walking a red carpet. Sterling lingered for a second. Packing his briefcase, he looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. "You know," he said quietly, "you could have gotten more. A lot more." I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. I picked up my purse. "I got exactly what I wanted. Mr. Sterling, have a nice day." I walked out of the courtroom and into the hallway. The marble floors echoed with the sound of my sensible heels. I didn't look back at the heavy wooden doors. I walked to the elevator, pressed the down button, and waited. When the doors opened to the lobby, I saw them. Julian had pulled his car up to the front curb, a brand-new McLaren, bright orange, obnoxious, and leased. He was laughing, his head thrown back, the rain wetting his expensive suit, but he didn't care. Bella was in the passenger seat, phone out, filming him. He revved the engine, the sound thundering against the gray stone of the courthouse, a roar of dominance and excess. He was celebrating the acquisition of an anchor that was about to drag him to the bottom of the ocean. I walked past them, toward the parking lot where my 10-year-old Volvo was waiting. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked with the easy stride of a woman who had just unloaded a heavy burden. As Julian peeled away, tires screeching, speeding toward a future he thought was paved with gold, I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over a contact named Agent Miller. I didn't dial him. Not yet. I had one more call to make first. I dialed a number I had memorized but never saved. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" A male voice answered. Gruff, professional. "It is done," I said. My voice was no longer the soft, submissive whisper I had used in the courtroom. It was cold. It was sharp. It was the voice of the risk analyst I used to be. "The papers are signed. He has assumed full liability. The transfer is recorded." "You are sure?" the voice asked. "I watched him sign it," I said, watching the orange McLaren disappear around the corner. "He thinks he won the lottery. He just won a 20-year sentence," the voice said. "Are you safe?" "I am on my way to pick up Mia now," I said. "We are going to the safe house." "Good. Give us 1 hour to get the warrants finalized. Then we move." 1 hour, I repeated. "Aurora, yes. You walked away from $50 million today. You know that, right?" I looked at the gray sky. for the first time in 5 years. The rain didn't feel depressing. It felt like a cleansing. "No," I said, a small, genuine smile finally breaking across my face. I walked away from a burning building 5 minutes before the roof collapsed. "Go get him." I hung up the phone. I got into my old Volvo. The engine sputtered when I turned the key, a stark contrast to the roar of the McLaren. But it started. It was reliable. It was mine. And unlike Julian's empire, it wasn't built on a lie. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the courthouse and my past in the rearview mirror. The rain drumming against the roof of my Volvo was the only sound in the world as I merged onto the interstate. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, a hypnotic metronome that peeled back the layers of time. Driving away from the courthouse felt less like leaving a physical location and more like waking up from a 5-year coma. To understand why I smiled when I signed away my life, you have to understand who I was before I became Mrs. Julian Thorne. 5 years ago, I was not a silent woman in a beige blazer. I was a senior risk analyst for a major investment bank. My job was to look at the golden promises of enthusiastic men and find the rot beneath the floorboards. I was paid to be cynical. I was paid to find the variable that would cause the bridge to collapse. I was sharp. I was ambitious. And I was entirely self-sufficient. Then came Julian. He did not conquer me with force. He conquered me with a vision. He pitched our marriage the same way he pitched his startups. He sat me down in a bistro in Pioneer Square, his eyes bright with that manic, infectious energy that made people want to empty their wallets into his hands. He told me that we were going to build an empire. He told me that my caution was the perfect counterbalance to his velocity. He said we were a team. That was the first lie. It started slowly. The dismantling of Aurora Waverly. It began with my career. "You are wasting your brilliance analyzing other people's dreams." "Aurora," he told me one night, tracing the line of my jaw with his thumb. "Quit the firm. Come work with me. Help me build Thorne & Company from the ground up. I need you. I cannot trust anyone else with the books." It sounded like a partnership. In reality, it was isolation. I resigned the next day. 2 weeks later, Julian suggested that we liquidate the $300,000 my parents had left me when they passed away in a car accident the year prior. It was my safety net. The money meant for a down payment on a modest house, for a rainy day. It is sitting there earning 2% interest. "Honey," he laughed, a sound that made me feel foolish for being prudent. "That is dead money. Put it into the company. We will turn it into $3 million in 2 years. Do you not trust me? Do you not trust us?" I transferred the money, every cent of it. That was the moment the cage door clicked shut. Though I did not hear the lock turn until much later. Once the money was gone, the dynamic shifted. The partnership evaporated. Julian decided that having his wife officially on the payroll looked messy for investors. "You work from home," he said. "Handle the lifestyle. Handle the networking. Let me be the face. You are the heart." I became a housewife with a phantom job, and then I became a beggar in my own home. Julian controlled the finances with a terrifying precision. He gave me a credit card for household expenses, but every transaction sent a notification to his phone. If I bought a coffee that was not on the approved list, he would make a joke about it at dinner. Just a joke, just a small, sharp comment about my expensive latte habit, while he wore a suit that cost $4,000. He curated my appearance, the blazers, the sensible heels, the muted colors. Those were his choices. "You represent me now," he would say, holding up a gray dress that looked like something a librarian would wear in a movie from the 1950s. "We need to look respectable, stable, old money." I disappeared by degrees. The risk analyst was replaced by the visionary's wife. Then came Mia. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought things would change. I thought the tenderness would return. And for the public, it did. Julian's Instagram feed became a shrine to impending fatherhood. He posted photos of the ultrasound with captions about building a legacy and the next generation of Thorne innovators, but inside our house on Lake Washington, The silence grew louder. I went to every prenatal appointment alone because Julian was disrupting the industry when I went into labor. He was on a conference call. He arrived at the hospital 10 minutes after Mia was born, took a selfie with me, sweaty, exhausted, and bleeding holding our daughter, posted it with the caption, "My two queens," and then left to go get drinks with a potential angel investor. He never changed a diaper, not once. He never walked the floor at 3 a.m. when Mia was screaming from colic. He called her crying noise pollution and moved into the guest wing so he could get his CEO sleep. Yet, at dinner parties, he was father of the year. I remember one night specifically. Mia was 2 years old. We were hosting a dinner for the board of directors. The house was spotless. The catering was exquisite, and I was wearing a dress Julian had selected. I was exhausted, surviving on 4 hours of sleep. But I was smiling. I was playing the part. One of the board members, a man named Davis, asked me about my background. "I heard you used to be quite the analyst." "Aurora," Davis said, swirling his wine. "Julian tells me you have a head for numbers." Before I could answer, Julian laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Oh, Aurora is a worrier, not an analyst," Julian said, placing a possessive hand on my shoulder. His grip was tight. "If it were up to her, we would still be keeping our cash under a mattress. She has this cute little anxiety about leverage. She does not understand that in the modern economy, debt is just a tool. She is very traditional, old school." The table laughed. They laughed at my caution. They laughed at my previous career. "It is a good thing she has you to steer the ship then, Julian," Davis said. "Exactly," Julian beamed. "I am the gas pedal. She is the parking brake, and nobody wins a race with the parking brake on." I sat there, sipping my water, and I felt myself shrinking. I felt the sharp, analytical mind I had honed for a decade being reduced to a cute little anxiety. That is what gaslighting does. It doesn't just make you doubt your reality. It makes you doubt your competence. It makes you believe that your instincts are actually defects. I started to believe him. I started to think that maybe I really was too small-minded to understand his genius. Maybe I was just a frightened housewife who didn't understand how unicorns were built. But the risk analyst in me was not dead. She was just in a coma. And she woke up 6 months ago. Thorne and Company were skyrocketing. The valuation hit $50 million. Julian was on the cover of tech magazines. But something felt wrong. The lifestyle he was leading, the cars, the watches, the private jets, didn't match the burn rate I knew a startup should have, even a successful one. I was banned from the office, of course. No spouses allowed was the rule Julian had invented, but he was sloppy at home. One afternoon, while he was playing golf with a senator, I saw a folder on his desk in the home office. He usually kept it locked, but the cleaner had been in and left the door ajar. I walked in. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't snooping for evidence of an affair I already suspected Bella by then. I was snooping for the numbers. I opened the folder. It was a draft prospectus for a new product called the Thorne High Yield Liquidity Fund. I read the summary, then I read it again. It promised investors a guaranteed 18% annual return, completely liquid, backed by proprietary algorithmic trading, 18%, guaranteed. In this market, my blood ran cold. The math didn't work. It was impossible. Unless you were trading illegal insider information or unless you were paying old investors with new investors' money. I grabbed a calculator. I sat on the floor of his office, surrounded by his awards and his framed magazine covers, and I ran the numbers. I projected the cash flow. I looked at the user acquisition costs he had boasted about in interviews. There was a hole, a massive, gaping black hole in the center of the company. The revenue from the actual software product was minuscule. The money was coming from partner buy-ins and investment rounds. He wasn't running a fintech company. He was running a glorified pyramid scheme wrapped in an app. When Julian came home that night, I made a mistake. I confronted him. I didn't do it aggressively. I did it as his wife. I did it as the partner he had promised I would be. Julian, I said, meeting him in the kitchen. I saw the prospectus for the liquidity fund. His face darkened instantly. The charm vanished. What were you doing in my office? The door was open, I said, keeping my voice steady. Julian, look at these projections. You cannot guarantee 18%. It is unsustainable. If the market turns, even slightly, you will be underwater in 3 months. This looks like a Ponzi structure. I expected him to explain. I expected him to show me the secret variable I was missing. Instead, he laughed. But this wasn't the jovial laugh he used at parties. This was a cold, cruel sound. You see, he sneered, walking over to the fridge to pour himself a sparkling water. This is exactly why you are a housewife, Aurora. This is why you are not on the board. You look at a breakthrough and you see a crime. You are so limited. It is not about being limited, Julian, I insisted, my voice rising. It is about math. Math does not lie. You are over-leveraged. If the SEC looks at this, he slammed the glass down on the counter. The sound cracked through the kitchen like a gunshot. The SEC is not going to look at anything because I know how to handle them, he shouted. He stepped into my personal space, towering over me. You stay out of my business. You stay in your lane. Your job is to raise Mia and look good in the photos. My job is to change the world. Do not ever presume to lecture me on finance again. You are a nobody. Aurora, you are nothing without me. If I walked out that door, you would starve. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. You are lucky I keep you around, he whispered. Most men would have traded you in for a newer model years ago. You are boring, you are old, and you are stupid. He turned and walked away. Leaving me standing in the kitchen, that was the moment I knew. I wasn't just in a bad marriage, I was sleeping next to a criminal. And worse, because of the way he had structured our joint tax returns documents, he always forced me to sign without reading. Claiming his team had handled it, I was likely an accessory. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw the lines of exhaustion around my eyes. I saw the fear. But deeper down, behind the gray iris, I saw the risk analyst waking up. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was blind. He had made the classic mistake of the narcissist he believed his own press release. He thought that because he had beaten me down emotionally, he had lobotomized me intellectually. I washed my face. I didn't cry. Tears were a luxury I could no longer afford. I had to get out, but I couldn't just leave. If I divorced him now, with the company in this state, the investigation would start, and he would pin it all on me. He would use his lawyers and his charm to paint me as the CFO in the shadows, the number cruncher, who cooked the books while he was just the innocent visionary. No, I needed a clean break. I needed him to take everything. I needed to turn his greed into my weapon. As I drove the Volvo through the rain, memories flashing by like the streetlights, I gripped the steering wheel tighter. That night in the kitchen was the turning point. It was the night the thank you began to form in my throat. He wanted to be the king fine. I would let him have the kingdom, but first, I had to find the smoking gun. I had the suspicion, but I needed the proof, and I knew exactly where to find it. I smiled at the road ahead. The flashback faded, replaced by the cold, hard reality of what I had done. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect of his destruction, and he had handed me the blueprints himself. The opportunity arrived on a Tuesday, wrapped in the smell of expensive scotch and the stench of arrogance. It was 2 a.m. The house was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, an antique Julian had bought not because he liked it, but because it cost $12,000. I was in the kitchen, nursing a cup of herbal tea I didn't want, unable to sleep. My intuition had been vibrating under my skin for weeks, a low-frequency hum that warned of an approaching earthquake. Then the front door crashed open. Julian stumbled in. He was singing something under his breath, a disjointed melody that sounded like a victory march. He didn't see me in the shadows of the breakfast nook. He tossed his keys onto the marble counter with a clatter that sounded violent in the quiet house. Then, he did something he never did. He dropped his laptop bag. He pulled out his MacBook Pro, flipped it open on the kitchen island, typed something rapidly, and then turned away to raid the liquor cabinet. He didn't close the lid. He didn't lock the screen. Julian was drunk on alcohol. Yes, but he was more intoxicated by his own perceived invincibility. He poured himself a glass of amber liquid, downed it in one gulp, and staggered toward the stairs. Top of the world, he muttered to the empty room. King of the hill. He disappeared up the staircase. I waited. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of a bedroom door closing, and then the distinct sound of the lock turning. He wasn't locking me out. He was locking himself in with his secrets, or so he thought. I stood up. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. They were trembling from the adrenaline spike that every analyst gets when they know they are staring at the raw data. I walked to the island. The screen was glowing in the dark kitchen like a portal. I touched the trackpad. The screen brightened. No password prompt. He had set the auto lock to never. Probably for a presentation he had been running earlier in the evening and had forgotten to revert. I sat down on the bar stool. The cold marble seeped through my pajamas. I wasn't Aurora the wife anymore. I was Aurora the risk analyst. I took a deep breath, compartmentalized my emotions into a steel box in the back of my mind, and went to work. I started with the obvious, the low-hanging fruit. I opened his email client and searched for Bella. I expected to find love letters. I expected to find sexts or dinner reservations. I found those, certainly, but I found something else, something that made the accountant in me sit up straighter. There were dozens of emails with subject lines like Invoice 402 and Consulting Fee, May. I opened one. It was an invoice from a company called Luna Marketing Solutions. The address was a P.O. box in Nevada. The service description was vague, strategic brand consulting and market penetration analysis. The amount was $15,000. I clicked on the attachment. The invoice was signed by Bella Luna. I did a quick search of the Nevada Business Registry in a separate tab. Luna Marketing Solutions was incorporated 3 months ago. The registered agent was Bella. Julian wasn't just sleeping with his chief marketing officer. He was funneling company money to her through a shell company. He was siphoning capital out of Thorne & Company under the guise of marketing expenses. That was embezzlement, plain and simple. But why? Why steal from your own company if you own it? Unless the company isn't actually making money. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I needed to see the books, the real books, not the glossy PDFs he sent to investors. I navigated to the internal server. Julian had administrative access to everything. I found a folder labeled Master Financials _internal_ do not share. I opened the spreadsheet for the current fiscal year. The numbers hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Thorne & Company were bleeding. The burn rate was catastrophic. They were spending $2 million a month on operations, salaries, and Julian's lavish business development trips, but the revenue column was anemic. The core product, the AI-driven trading algorithm, was generating less than $50,000 a month in actual subscription fees. So where was the money coming from? I scrolled down to the cash flow section. Inflow Series B, capital injection. Inflow Angel Investor Group 4. Inflow Private Equity Bridge Loan. I looked at the dates. Every time the operating account dipped below $100,000, a new investor would appear. And immediately after the money hit the account, large transfers were made to early redemption requests. I cross-referenced the names. The early investors cashing out were people from Julian's inner circle, his college friends, a cousin in Miami. It was a classic structure. He was using money from new investors to pay returns to the old ones to keep the hype alive and stop them from asking questions. It wasn't a fintech company. It was a Ponzi scheme, dressed up in an Armani suit. My stomach churned. This was prison time. This was federal. This was 20 years. Minimum. But then I found the file that stopped my heart. It was a PDF labeled IRS_compliance _2024 signed. I opened it. It was a standard tax compliance form, declaring the company's officers and their legal liabilities. I scrolled to the bottom, expecting to see Julian's signature. I saw mine. Aurora Waverly. Title Chief Legal Officer / Designated Representative. The signature was perfect. It looked exactly like mine. It was a digital copy of the signature I had used on our mortgage papers 5 years ago. He had lifted it. He had cut and pasted it. I opened another file. SEC_form_D_filing. Signed by Aurora Waverly. I opened a third. Loan_guarantee_Silicon_Valley_Bank. Signed by Aurora Waverly. The room spun. I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from sliding off the stool. He hadn't just excluded me from the business to control me. He had set me up. He had spent the last 3 years building a paper trail that pointed directly to me, in the eyes of the government. Julian was just the charismatic face, the idea man, who didn't handle the boring paperwork. I was the one signing the checks. I was the one certifying the false numbers. I was the one declaring that the company was solvent when it was technically bankrupt. If this house of cards collapsed and it was going to collapse, Julian would throw up his hands and say, "I didn't know my wife, the former risk analyst, handled the books. I trusted her. He wasn't just a narcissist. He was a predator." He had been planning this since the day he asked me to liquidate my parents' inheritance. I wasn't his partner. I was his scapegoat. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to swallow bile. I looked at the ceiling, thinking of Mia sleeping in her room upstairs. Her father was going to destroy her mother to save his own skin. He was going to let me go to federal prison while he played the victim on talk shows. I closed my eyes. I let the fear wash over me, cold and sharp, and then I let it drain away. When I opened my eyes, the tears were gone. The shaking had stopped. I wasn't a wife anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was a witness. I needed to know the endgame. I went to his sent folder. I searched for Sterling, his lawyer. I found an email sent 3 days ago. The subject line was Operation Clean Slate. I clicked it. Sterling, the Series C funding is about to close. We are looking at another $20 million coming in next week. That should give us enough runway to finalize the divorce. I need the settlement agreement ready by Friday. We need to strip her of any equity claims so it looks like she is being punished. But make sure the liability clauses stick to the officers of record. Once the divorce is final and the assets are transferred to the new holding company in the Caymans, we can trigger the bankruptcy of the U.S. entity. The feds will look at the signatories. By the time they unravel it, I will be in docile retirement and she will be answering subpoenas. Make it happen. Jay. He was going to take the new money, stash it offshore, bankrupt the company, and leave me holding the bag for $50 million in fraud. I stared at the screen. The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was evil, yes, but from a structural standpoint, it was brilliant. It preyed on the very bias he had used against me for years, the assumption that the wife is the one who handles the details while the husband dreams. I looked at the clock. 3:15 in the morning. He would wake up around 8. I had less than 5 hours. I didn't panic. Panic is for people who don't have a plan. I ran to the living room and grabbed my purse, dug out the encrypted USB drive I kept on my keychain, a habit from my old life that Julian had always mocked as paranoid. I plugged it into the laptop. I didn't just copy the files. That would be amateur. I created a disk image of the entire hard drive. Every email, every deleted file, every metadata tag that showed exactly when he created the documents and whose computer they were created on. I needed to prove that he was the one logging in, he was the one typing, and that my signatures were pasted on by his user account. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 30%. I heard a floorboard creak upstairs. I froze. If he came down now, if he saw me, I had a heavy ceramic vase on the counter within reach. The thought that crossed my mind was dark, violent, and utterly serious. If he came down those stairs, I would not let him touch that laptop. But the house settled. Silence returned. 80%, 95, complete. I ejected the drive. My hand closed around it. The metal warm from the computer's heat. This was it. This was the weapon. But I wasn't done. I opened the system logs. I found the entry for my login session. I deleted it. I wiped the recent items menu. I cleared the cache. Then, I did something subtle. I went back into the email draft folder. I found a draft he had started for Bella but hadn't sent. I added a single character, a space at the end of a sentence, and then deleted it. It didn't change the content, but it updated the last modified timestamp to right now. If he checked the logs, he wouldn't see that someone had accessed the financial records. He would see that the email application had been active. He would assume he had drunkenly opened it himself before passing out. It was a risk, but a calculated one. It fed his narrative of his own erratic behavior. I closed the laptop. I wiped the trackpad and the keyboard with the hem of my silk pajama top to remove fingerprints. I adjusted the screen angle slightly, trying to match exactly how he had left it. I picked up my tea, which was now ice cold. I walked out of the kitchen. I climbed the stairs, my legs feeling heavy but my mind moving at light speed. I went into Mia's room. She was sleeping soundly, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her breathing was soft, rhythmic, innocent. I knelt beside her bed. I brushed a strand of hair away from her forehead. "I will burn it all down," I whispered to her, a vow that felt more sacred than my marriage vows ever had. "I will burn his entire world to ash before I let him hurt you." I went to the guest room. I hid the USB drive inside the hollow base of a lamp I had bought at a thrift store years ago, the only piece of furniture in the house he hadn't selected. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I knew I wouldn't sleep. I was already planning the next move. He wanted a divorce, I would give him one. He wanted me to be the silent, compliant wife, I would be a mute. He wanted me to sign papers without reading them. I would sign my name so hard the ink would bleed through to the table. But this time, I would be the one writing the definitions. The sun began to creep up over the horizon, turning the Seattle gray into a bruised purple. Upstairs, the monster was sleeping, dreaming of his millions. Downstairs, the ghost of the woman he thought he had killed was preparing for war. I closed my eyes and rehearsed the line I would say to my lawyer. Let him think he is winning. Let him think he is taking everything, because the only thing he is taking is the anchor. And then, I waited for the morning. The University of Washington Law Library smelled of dust, old binding glue, and the desperate anxiety of first-year students. It was the only place in Seattle where I felt safe enough to meet Elias Vance. Elias had been my professor a decade ago, a man with a mind like a steel trap and a morality that was equally rigid. He was 65 now, wearing a tweed jacket that had likely been out of style since the Reagan administration. He sat at a secluded table in the back of the archives, the glow of my encrypted hard drive reflecting in his bifocals. He had been reading in silence for 20 minutes. Every few minutes, he would hum a low, discordant sound that meant he had found something particularly ugly. Finally, he pushed the laptop away and took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking at me with a mixture of sorrow and clinical admiration. "It is a masterpiece, Aurora," he said softly. "A masterpiece of fraud. The shell companies, the round-tripping of funds, the inflated user metrics. If this were a case study in my white-collar crime seminar, I would give him an A for audacity and an F for execution. I have enough to go to the FBI. Right?" I asked, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "I can turn him in today." Elias looked at me, his eyes sharp. "You could, and if you did, you would likely spend the next 5 years as a co-defendant." My heart stopped. "What? Look at the signatures. Aurora." Elias tapped the screen. "Look at the compliance logs. To a forensic accountant. This looks like Julian was the visionary frontman and you were the tactical operator. You are the chief legal officer of record. You signed the Sarbanes-Oxley certifications. You authorized the loans. But they are forgeries, I hissed, keeping my voice low. He cut and pasted them. We know that, Elias said, leaning forward. But proving it in a federal court against a man who has $20 million to spend on defense attorneys, it would be a war of attrition. He would claim you were a rogue employee. He would claim you set him up, and while you were fighting that battle, the assets would disappear, and you would be left bankrupt and possibly in prison. I felt the blood drain from my face. Julian had built the trap better than I thought. So I am trapped, I said. If I stay, I go down with the ship. If I talk, I get framed for the wreck. No, Elias said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a peppermint, unwrapping it slowly. You are not trapped. You just need to change the venue. You cannot fight this in criminal court. Not yet. You have to win it in family court first. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and uncapped a pen. The law assumes that when a spouse takes an asset in a divorce settlement, they take it with full knowledge of its condition, Elias explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If Julian fights you for the company, and if he signs a specific waiver declining a financial audit because he claims he knows the business better than anyone, and if he explicitly assumes all liabilities attached to that business, he is essentially confessing. He is confessing that he is the sole operator, I realized. Exactly. Elias smiled, a thin, dry expression. If he takes the company, he takes the crime, but he has to want to take it. He has to believe he is winning a prize, not catching a grenade. You need to make him fight for his own destruction. How? You become the gray rock, Elias said, and you make him believe that the only thing you care about is the one thing he does not want. I left the library with a plan that was terrifyingly simple. The gray rock method is a psychological strategy used to deal with narcissists. The premise is that a narcissist feeds on emotional reaction. If you argue, they win. If you cry, they win. If you defend yourself, they win. The only way to starve them is to become as uninteresting as a gray rock. I went home and I turned off my personality. For the next 3 weeks, I became a ghost in my own house. Julian would come home late, smelling of Bella's perfume and expensive whiskey, looking for a fight. He wanted to unload his stress on me. He wanted me to ask where he had been so he could call me jealous. He wanted me to complain about money so he could call me a gold digger. I saw the credit card bill, he said one Tuesday, throwing his keys on the counter. $200 at Target. What are you buying? Aurora gold-plated diapers. In the past, I would have itemized the receipt. I would have explained that Mia needed new shoes and we needed detergent. Instead, I just looked at him, my face blank. Okay, I said. I will be more careful. He blinked, thrown off balance. That is it. Will you be more careful? Yes. You are pathetic, he sneered, digging deeper. You have no ambition, no fire. No wonder I'm bored to death coming home to this. I understand, I said, turning back to the sink to wash a dish. Dinner is in the fridge if you are hungry. He stood there for a moment, vibrating with unspent aggression. When he couldn't get a reaction out of me, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door. I didn't flinch. I just kept scrubbing the plate. But while I was playing the role of the submissive wife, I was secretly weaponizing his own arrogance against him. I bought a digital voice recorder, a small, high-fidelity device that looked like a USB stick. I started leaving it in strategic places, in his home office, in the car when I knew he would be taking calls. I needed him to admit, in his own voice, that he was the only one running the show. I got the golden ticket on a Friday night. Julian was on the phone with his college buddy, a man named Marcus who was one of the early investors in the Ponzi scheme. Julian was pacing around the living room, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, unaware that the recorder was tucked behind a stack of books on the coffee table. Relax. Marcus? Julian's voice boomed. I handled the audit. There is no audit. I am the CEO, the CFO, and the board. Aurora, please. She thinks an EBITDA is a type of cheese. She signs what I tell her to sign. I run every single dime through this place. It is my show. I listened to the playback later that night in the bathroom, wearing headphones. She signs what I tell her to sign. I run every single dime. It was perfect. It was the nail in his coffin. But the hardest part was the smokescreen. I had to make him believe that my priorities were completely misaligned with reality. I had to make him think I was clinging to domestic life while he was ascending to godhood. I started leaving brochures for family counseling on the kitchen counter. I sent him emails pleading to make it work for Mia. I talked constantly about keeping the house because it is the only home Mia has ever known. I knew Julian hated that house. To him, it was an asset he wanted to leverage for more loans. He wanted a penthouse in the city. He wanted the bachelor lifestyle by clinging to the house and the marriage. I made myself an anchor, and Julian Thorne was a man who cut anchors. Then, Bella decided to help me. She found my Instagram account. It was a private account with only 30 followers, mostly family and old college friends, but she requested to follow me when I ignored it. The messages started coming. First, they were subtle. It must be nice to stay home all day while your husband works so hard. Then, they got bolder. He is miserable with you. Everyone knows it. You are holding him back. One afternoon, she sent a photo. It was a picture of her and Julian in our Aspen vacation home, a place I hadn't visited in 2 years because Julian said he was renting it out. They were in the hot tub. He looks happier here than he ever does with you. The caption read, I stared at the photo. The old Aurora would have been devastated. The new Aurora saw an opportunity. I waited until Julian came home. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked into his office, holding my phone out like it was a contaminated object. Julian, I said, my voice flat. Your employee is messaging me again. He looked up from his laptop, annoyed. What, Bella? I said. She sent me a photo of you two in Aspen. I do not care what you do. Julian, I really do not. But can you please tell her to stop harassing me? It is exhausting. I am trying to focus on Mia's school application, and my phone keeps buzzing with her insecurities. I framed it perfectly. I didn't frame it as a wife who was hurt. I framed it as a nuisance. I framed Bella as annoying. Julian looked at the photo, and then he looked at me. He didn't see jealousy. He saw boredom, and that terrified him. You do not care, he asked, his ego bruised. I care about stability for Mia, I said. If you want to sleep with your marketing director, that is your business. Just keep it off my phone. I walked out. I heard him shouting into his phone 5 minutes later. He wasn't shouting at me. He was shouting at Bella for being messy, but more importantly, the interaction planted a seed in his head. Aurora doesn't care about me. She is just a roommate, a boring, annoying roommate who is in the way. The timeline accelerated 3 days later when I found the term sheet. It was in the trash can of his home office. He had shredded it, but the shredder had jammed, leaving the top third of the document intact. Series C, funding proposal, lead investor, Apex Capital. Valuation, $75 million. Investment amount, $20 million. Closing date. November 1st. It was October 15th. He was 2 weeks away from bringing in $20 million of fresh capital. I sat on the floor, piecing the strips of paper together. This was the exit scam I had read about in his emails. He was going to take this money, use it to pay off the most dangerous debts, transfer the rest to the Caymans, and then let the company implode. But there was a catch. Investors in a Series C round usually require a clean cap table. They want to know exactly who owns the equity. They don't want a pending divorce case clouding the ownership structure. If Julian wanted that $20 million, he needed me gone before November 1st. He needed a divorce decree signed, sealed, and delivered in 2 weeks. I smiled. The clock was ticking, and I was about to control the time. I called Elias. He has a deadline, I said. He needs to close a funding round in 14 days. He is going to push for a settlement. Then we give him one, Elias said. But we make him think he is robbing you. How? You demand the company, Elias said. You tell him you know it is valuable. You tell him you contributed to it in the early days. You demand 50% of the shares. But I do not want the shares, I said. They are toxic. He does not know you know that, Elias chuckled. If you demand the shares, he will fight to the death to keep them. He will offer you anything else to keep full ownership, and in his desperation to keep 100% of the equity, he will also insist on keeping 100% of the liability. It was reverse psychology on a grand scale. To get him to take the poison, I had to pretend the poison was wine. That evening, I set the stage. I cooked a roast chicken, the smell filling the house with a deceptive warmth. When Julian came home, I was sitting at the dining table with a notepad and a calculator. We need to talk, I said. He groaned, loosening his tie. Can it wait? I have had a hell of a day. No, I said. I have been thinking about our future, about the company. He froze. What about the company? I was there when you started it, Julian, I said, infusing my voice with a sudden, feigned greed. I liquidated my parents' savings for it. I think I deserve a seat on the board, and I want my equity stake formalized. If we are going to be roommates, I want to be paid like a partner. Julian stared at me. His eyes narrowed. He didn't see the trap. He saw a threat. He saw a housewife trying to grab his gold. You want a seat on the board? He laughed. A cruel, incredulous sound. I own half of it legally, I said, crossing my arms. Washington is a community property state. If we divorce, I get half. If we stay married, I want half the control. The color drained from his face, not because he was afraid of my skills, but because he was afraid of the audit that would come with my involvement. If I demanded a formal valuation for the divorce, the auditors would find the fraud. He needed me out. He needed me to be silenced, and he needed to own everything so no one else could look under the hood. I think, Julian said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, that it is time we called the lawyers. I am done with this marriage. Fine, I said, pretending to be hurt. But I am not walking away empty-handed. I know what that company is worth. You will get what you deserve, he spat. Yes, I thought, watching him storm off to call Sterling. And you will get exactly what you deserve, too. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now, all I had to do was wait for the snap. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered not by my husband, but by a process server who looked bored. He handed me a thick envelope on the front porch of the house I had spent 5 years decorating, mumbled, "Have a nice day," and walked away before I could even close the door. I took the envelope into the kitchen. My hands were steady. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside, but I did anyway. Julian was filing for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences. The proposed division of assets was laughable. He was offering me the Volvo, my personal jewelry, excluding the pieces he claimed were investments, and a one-time payment of $10,000. In exchange, he demanded full ownership of Thorne & Company, the house, the vacation properties, and all investment accounts. It was an eviction notice disguised as a legal document. I called Elias immediately. He has made the first move, I said. Good, Elias replied, his voice crackling over the encrypted line. Now we play the pauper. You need a lawyer, Aurora, but not a shark. You need someone who looks like they bought their suit at a discount store and learned the law from watching television dramas. You need Arthur Pendergast. Arthur Pendergast was exactly as Elias described. His office was located in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner that smelled faintly of chemicals. He was a man in his late 50s with a comb-over that wasn't fooling anyone and a nervous habit of clicking his pen, but when he looked at my file, his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and terrifyingly cold. He was a master negotiator who specialized in playing the fool. "So," Arthur said, looking at the fraudulent tax returns I had brought him, "we are going into a lion's den, Mrs. Thorne, and your job is to look like a gazelle with a broken leg." "I can do that," I said. "We need him to believe that you are fighting for the money because you are greedy, not because you are trying to trap him," Arthur instructed. "If you ask for the company because you want to run it, he will get suspicious. If you ask for the company because you want to cash out and buy expensive shoes, he will believe it. Narcissists always believe everyone else is as shallow as they are." The mediation took place 4 days later in the conference room of Sterling's high-rise office downtown. The room was designed to intimidate. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the Seattle skyline, a subtle reminder of who owned the city and who didn't. The table was a slab of polished marble that looked like a tombstone. Julian sat at the head of the table, flanked by Sterling and 2 junior associates who looked like they had been cloned in a lab. Julian was wearing a charcoal suit, his posture relaxed, his face bored. He checked his watch, a Rolex Daytona this time, as we entered. I walked in behind Arthur. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a dress that was slightly too big, making me look frail, and very little makeup so the circles under my eyes were visible. I clutched a tissue in my hand. Arthur dropped his briefcase on the table. It made a pathetic, hollow sound. He fumbled with the latches for a moment before getting it open, spilling a few papers onto the marble. Sterling smirked. Julian rolled his eyes. They had already won. In their minds. "Let us get started," Sterling said, not bothering to hide his disdain. "We are here to save everyone time. Mr. Thorne's offer is on the table. It is generous. Considering Mrs. Thorne has not contributed a single dollar to the household in 5 years. Arthur cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Actually, Mr. Sterling, my client feels that, well, she feels that she is entitled to 50% of the marital estate, including the company." Julian laughed. It was a dry, sharp bark. 50%. She cannot even balance a checkbook. "Washington is a community property state," Arthur said, his voice wavering slightly. "And, well, Mrs. Thorne was present during the founding. She feels that her emotional support was integral." "Emotional support does not vest stock options," Sterling cut in. "Thorne and Company is the sole intellectual property of Julian Thorne. Mrs. Thorne's name is not on a single patent. She is not an officer. She is not an employee." I looked down at my hands, squeezing the tissue. "I want what is fair," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I gave up my career for him. I want my share of the $50 million. Julian leaned forward. "There is no $50 million for you. Aurora, there is only what I decide to give you. Do not push me." "I want an audit," I blurted out. The room went dead silent. This was the trigger, the carefully placed landmine. I looked up, meeting Julian's eyes with a desperate, greedy intensity I had practiced in the mirror. "If you say the company is yours, prove it. I want a forensic audit. I want to see the books. I want to know exactly how much you are worth before I sign anything. My cousin told me I should check the accounts." Julian froze. I saw the blood drain from his face. Adam's apple bobbed. An audit. An audit would show the Ponzi scheme. An audit would show the payments to Bella's shell company. An audit would show that the $50 million valuation was built on air. He couldn't let an auditor within 10 miles of his servers. "That is unnecessary," Sterling said, though he looked annoyed by the interruption. "An audit will take months. It will cost tens of thousands of dollars. It will delay the settlement." "I do not care," I said, my voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I want to know where the money is. I know you are hiding it. Julian, I know you are spending it on her." I pointed a shaking finger at his phone, implying Bella. Julian slammed his hand on the table. "You are crazy," he shouted. "You are paranoid, and you are crazy." "Mr. Thorne," Arthur said softly, "if we cannot agree on a settlement, the court will order a valuation. It is standard procedure." Julian looked at Sterling. Then he looked at me. I could see the gears turning in his head. Panic was wrestling with arrogance. He needed to stop the audit, but he couldn't look weak. "I built this company," Julian roared. Standing up, he began to pace the room, his gestures wild. "Me. Nobody else. She—" He pointed at me. "She sat at home watching television while I worked 18-hour days. She does not know the first thing about the business. She does not know the code. She does not know the investors. She does not know the liabilities. She is a parasite." Arthur quietly reached over and tapped his pen on his notepad. A signal we had agreed upon. "So you are stating, for the record," Arthur asked, his voice mild, "that you are the sole operator that Mrs. Thorne has absolutely no knowledge of, or involvement in, the financial operations of Thorne and Company?" "Yes," Julian screamed. "She is incompetent. She has never made a single decision. I did it all. Every contract, every loan, every hire. It is 100% me." Arthur looked at the court reporter who was transcribing the mediation. "Let the record show that Mr. Thorne asserts sole and exclusive control and responsibility for all business entities." Julian didn't even realize what he had just done. He thought he was insulting me. In reality, he was exonerating me. He had just admitted, on the record, that the fraudulent signatures and the fake compliance reports were his doing, because I was too incompetent to be involved. But we weren't done. The trap wasn't shut yet. "If you are the sole owner," Arthur said, "then you should have no problem buying her out, but my client insists on an audit to determine the buyout price." "No audit," Julian snapped. "I told you, we do not have time for that." "Then we go to trial," Arthur said, reaching for his briefcase. "And the judge will order one." Julian looked terrified. He whispered something frantically to Sterling. Sterling frowned, looking confused by his client's sudden desperation, but he nodded. "Give us the room," Sterling said. Arthur and I walked out into the hallway. My legs felt like jelly. "You are doing perfectly," Arthur whispered, pretending to check his watch. "He is terrified. He is going to come back with the nuclear option. Be ready." 10 minutes later, we were called back in. The atmosphere in the room had changed. It was colder, darker. Julian was sitting very still. He looked like a man who had decided to cut off his own arm to escape a bear trap. "My client has a new proposal," Sterling said. "To avoid the unnecessary expense and delay of an audit, Mr. Thorne is willing to offer a simplified division of assets." "We are listening," Arthur said. "Mr. Thorne will retain 100% of the business assets," Sterling said, "including Thorne and Company, the intellectual property, and all associated holdings. In exchange, he will assume 100% of the business debts and liabilities. Mrs. Thorne will walk away with no equity, but also no exposure." "And the payout?" Arthur asked. "There is no payout," Julian cut in. His voice was low, dangerous. "Because if she does not agree to this, if she insists on this audit and drags this out, I will go for full custody of Mia." The air left my lungs. I didn't have to fake the reaction this time. "You cannot do that," I whispered. "Oh, I can," Julian smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I have the money, Aurora. I can hire the best child psychologists in the state. I can paint you as unstable, depressed, unemployed, living in a fantasy world. I will drag you through court for 3 years until you run out of money and sanity, and by the time I am done, you will see Mia on alternating weekends. If you are lucky." He leaned forward, his eyes dead. "Do you want to gamble with your daughter, Aurora, or do you want to walk away?" This was it, the pivot point. He was using the one thing he knew I loved to force me to give him the one thing he needed to destroy himself. He thought he was checkmating me. He was actually signing his own death warrant. I let the tears spill over, real tears, born of the rage I felt at him, using our daughter as a bargaining chip. I slumped in my chair, making myself small, defeated. "No," I sobbed. Please, not Mia. She is all I have. Then sign the agreement, Julian hissed. Waive the audit, waive the equity, give me the company, and you can keep the kid. I looked at Arthur. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I took a shaky breath. I cannot lose her. Smart choice, Julian said, leaning back, the arrogance returning in a flood. I looked at him, wiping my eyes. Fine, I said, my voice broken. Take it. Take the company. Take the house. Take everything. Just put it in writing that I am out. I do not want to be connected to you anymore. I want a clean break. Gladly, Julian said. Sterling, draw it up. Include the waiver of independent review. She is declining the audit voluntarily. Yes, I said. I am declining it. Just let me leave. I watched them. I watched Julian's shoulders relax. I watched him exchange a look of victory with Sterling. He thought he had bullied me into submission. He thought he had protected his secret. He had no idea that by forcing me to waive the audit and give him sole ownership, he was legally sealing the airlock on his own sinking ship. He was accepting the debts. He was accepting the fraud, and he was using a threat against his own child to do it. We will have the final papers ready for the court hearing, Sterling said, closing his folder. It is a pleasure doing business. I stood up. I felt lightheaded. You win, Julian, I said softly. You always win. I know, he said, not even looking at me as he checked his phone. Bella says hello, by the way. I walked out of that conference room, Arthur trailing behind me. We walked to the elevator in silence. We rode down 40 floors in silence. When the doors opened to the lobby, Arthur turned to me. His confused old lawyer act dropped instantly. A shark-like grin spread across his face. That, Arthur said, was the most expensive custody threat in history. He just bought himself a federal indictment to save $20,000 on a forensic accountant. He thinks he stripped me of my assets, I said, walking out into the cool Seattle air. He did, Arthur agreed. He stripped you of the anchor. Now, we just wait for him to drown. The document that would end Julian Thorne's life was not a gun or a knife. It was a 54-page settlement agreement typed in 12-point Times New Roman font. Arthur Pendergast sat across from me in his cramped office, the air conditioner rattling in the window like a dying engine. On his desk lay the draft agreement sent over by Sterling's office. It was an aggressive, bullying document. It stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my financial future. It was designed to make me feel small, but Arthur was smiling. They made a mistake, Arthur said, tapping the paper with his cheap plastic pen. A classic mistake. They focused so much on taking the assets that they forgot to guard the exits. Show me, I said. Arthur flipped to page 46. Here, section 9, paragraph 3. They have listed the assets Julian retains with extreme specificity. The intellectual property, real estate, the stock options, but look at the liabilities section. I read it. It was boilerplate language. Each party shall retain responsibility for debts incurred in their own name. This is not enough, I said. The risk analyst in me taking over. If the DOJ indicts the company, they will freeze everything. If my name is still on the corporate filings, they will freeze me too. We need him to actively absolve me. We need him to claim the debt the same way he claims the credit. Exactly, Arthur said. He pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. We are going to add an addendum. We will call it the Comprehensive Indemnification and Assumption of Liability Clause. It sounds boring. It sounds like standard legalese, but it is a poison pill. We spent the next 3 hours crafting the language. It had to be precise enough to hold up in federal court, but vague enough not to trigger Sterling's alarm bells. We wrote the respondent, Julian Thorne, acknowledges full and sole operational control of Thorne and Company and its subsidiaries. The respondent hereby assumes full personal liability for all financial obligations, tax liens, regulatory fines, and legal encumbrances, whether known or unknown, past or future, Associated with said entities, the petitioner, Aurora Waverly, is hereby released from any and all claims, and the respondent agrees to indemnify and hold her harmless against any third-party actions. Regulatory fines, Arthur murmured, reading it back. That covers the SEC, unknown liabilities covers the Ponzi scheme debt, and sole operational control covers your signature forgeries. It is perfect, I said. But Sterling will see it. He is arrogant, but he is not an idiot. If he sees a liability clause this broad, he will tell Julian not to sign it. Arthur leaned back in his creaking chair, his eyes twinkling. That is why we do not put it in the liabilities section. We hide it. Hide it where? In the personal property and miscellaneous section, Arthur said. We sandwich it between the things Julian cares about the least. We restructured the document. We created a new section titled Disposition of Personal Effects and Final Clauses. First, we listed my request for the Volvo. Then, we listed my request for the antique china set. My grandmother left me something Julian had always called dusty junk. Then, we inserted the poison pill, and immediately after it, we listed a demand for the family photo albums and the old leather sofa in the basement. He will be skimming, Arthur explained. He will see china set. He will roll his eyes. He will see sofa. He will laugh. His brain will categorize this entire page as Aurora's sentimental garbage. He will not read the paragraph in the middle because he thinks he already knows what it says. We sent the revised draft to Sterling's office at 4 p.m. on a Friday. The timing was deliberate. Arthur knew that Julian was hosting a launch party for a new virtual wallet feature that didn't actually exist. He would be busy, he would be drunk on champagne and adulation, and he would be in a rush to get the legal nonsense over with so he could fly to Paris on Sunday with Bella. I went home and waited. The silence in the house was heavy. I packed boxes, not because I had to move out yet, but because it helped sell the narrative. I packed china. I packed the photo albums. I made sure that if Julian dropped by, he would see a defeated woman retreating from his kingdom. At 7 p.m, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur. Sterling is pushing back. He flagged the clause. My stomach dropped. I sat down on the floor, surrounded by bubble wrap. If Sterling flagged it, the game was over. They would delete the clause, and I would be left defenseless. I called Arthur. What did he say? He told Julian it is too broad, Arthur said, his voice calm. He told Julian that assuming unknown liabilities is risky. He advised Julian to strike it. And, I asked, my grip on the phone tightening until my knuckles turned white. And, Arthur paused, letting the suspense hang in the air for a second. Julian overruled him. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He what? Sterling is on the phone with me right now, venting. Arthur chuckled. Apparently, Julian is at the launch party. He is surrounded by investors. He told Sterling and I, quote, stop nickeling and diming her. She wants the old couch and some legal comfort. Give it to her. I own the company. Of course I own the debt. The company is worth $50 million. Sterling, who cares about a few liabilities? Just get it signed so I can leave for Europe. He thinks the company is real, I whispered. He has told the lie so many times he actually believes the valuation outweighs the fraud. He is arrogant, Arthur corrected. He thinks he can fix the books before anyone notices. He thinks this clause is just you being a scared little housewife worrying about credit card bills. He has no idea. He just agreed to take the fall for a federal crime. Is it signed? Not yet. He will sign it in court tomorrow morning to make it official before the judge, but the draft is approved. Sterling sent the confirmation email. We have him. Aurora. I hung up the phone. The trap was primed. The bait was taken. But I wasn't safe yet. Julian was volatile. If he woke up tomorrow morning with a hangover and a sudden clarity of mind, he could change his mind. Or worse, if Bella asked questions, Bella, who was actually involved in the shell companies, she might realize what that clause meant. I needed an insurance policy, a dead man's switch. I went to my laptop. I logged into a secure, encrypted email service I had set up weeks ago. I drafted an email addressed to the special agent in charge at the Seattle FBI field office. I also CC'd the Enforcement Division of the SEC and the IRS whistleblower tip line. Subject evidence of massive financial fraud. Thorne and Company. I attached the disk image of Julian's hard drive. I attached the audio recording of him admitting he was the sole operator. I attached the forensic accounting spreadsheet I had created, detailing the Ponzi structure, and I attached a PDF of the draft settlement agreement where he claimed full liability. Then, I set the delivery timer. Send in 72 hours. If I walked out of that courtroom a free woman, I would manually trigger the email sooner. But if something happened to me, if Julian realized what I had done and hurt me, or if he managed to trap me legally, the email would be sent automatically. I stared at the countdown clock. 72 hours, 3 days. It was the nuclear option. Once that email went out, there was no taking it back. Thorne and Company would be vaporized. The investors would lose everything. Julian would be destroyed. And if I hadn't secured my immunity with that signed court order, I might have been destroyed by him. I closed the laptop. The house was dark. I walked upstairs to Mia's room. She was sleeping in a tangle of blankets, her breathing soft and rhythmic. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting a pale glow on her face. She looked so much like me, but she had Julian's chin, a stubborn chin. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wake her. For 5 years, I had been afraid. I had been afraid of Julian's temper, afraid of his criticism, afraid of his financial control. I had let him shrink me down until I fit into the small, silent box he had built for me. But looking at Mia, I realized that the fear was gone. It had been burned away by a cold, hard resolve. "He thinks he is winning," I whispered to the sleeping room. "He thinks he is taking everything from us." I reached out and touched Mia's small hand. "But he is wrong, baby. He is taking the poison, and tomorrow, when he swallows it, he will smile and think it is wine." I stood up and went to the window. I looked out at the driveway, where Julian's McLaren usually sat. It was empty. He was at a hotel downtown, probably celebrating with Bella, probably toasting to his new life. I imagined him raising a glass. I imagined him laughing. "Enjoy it, Julian," I said to the empty night. "Enjoy the party, because the bill is coming due." I went to my own bedroom, but I didn't sleep. I laid out my clothes for court: the charcoal blazer, the sensible shoes, the costume of the defeated wife. I practiced my expression in the mirror. I relaxed my facial muscles until I looked tired, resigned, beaten. I practiced the slump of my shoulders. "I just want it to be over," I practiced saying. "I just want peace." It was the greatest lie I would ever tell. I didn't want peace. I wanted justice. And tomorrow, in Department 4 of the King County Superior Court, I was going to get it. I looked at the clock. 6 hours until the hearing. I lay down on the bed, my grandmother's sapphire ring cold against my chest. I closed my eyes and waited for the sunrise that would burn Julian Thorne's world to the ground. While I was inflating a twin-sized air mattress in a 2-bedroom apartment in Renton, my ex-husband was uncorking a bottle of Dom Perignon worth more than my first month's rent. I knew this because my phone, which was propped up against a stack of unread books, was broadcasting his life in high definition. Julian had gone straight from the courthouse to the Vault, a members-only club downtown where the walls were lined with black velvet and the air smelled of ego and expensive cologne. He wasn't just celebrating, he was performing. He had set up his phone on the table, streaming live to his 40,000 followers on Instagram. I sat back on my heels, wiping dust from my hands, and watched the show. "We are free, boys," Julian shouted over the thumping bass of a techno track. He was holding a glass of champagne in one hand and a cigar in the other. His tie was loosened, his jacket discarded. He looked manic. "The dead weight is gone. The anchor has been cut. Thorne and Company are officially ready for takeoff." Bella leaned into the frame. She had changed out of her court dress into something silver and backless. She kissed his cheek. making sure her left hand, the one bearing the Patek Philippe, was perfectly framed by the camera lens. "To the IPO," Bella squealed. "To the IPO," Julian roared, clinking his glass against the lens. "We are going public in 6 months. People, get your wallets ready. This rocket ship is leaving the atmosphere, and we finally kicked the passenger who was dragging us down." The comments scrolled up the side of the screen in a blur of emojis. Fire, rockets, flexing biceps, the king moves. She never deserved you. Bro. Upgrade of the century. It was a masterclass in delusion. Here was a man standing on the edge of a cliff, convinced he was learning to fly. He was celebrating the acquisition of a company that was technically insolvent, bragging about an initial public offering that would never happen because the S-1 filing would trigger the federal audit he had spent 3 years avoiding. He was drunk on his own narrative. He truly believed that the only thing stopping him from becoming the next Elon Musk was his boring wife who asked too many questions about liquidity. I tapped the screen, muting the sound. I didn't need to hear his voice anymore. I just needed to verify his location. He was public. He was distracted. He was surrounded by witnesses who would later testify that he was celebrating his total ownership of the company. "Mommy." I turned around. Mia was standing in the doorway of her new bedroom. She was holding her stuffed rabbit by the ears. "Is the bed ready?" she asked. "Almost, baby," I said, my voice softening instantly. "It is going to be like camping, just for a few nights until the real furniture comes." We were in a garden-level apartment in a quiet complex 40 minutes south of the city. It had beige carpet, popcorn ceilings, and a view of a rhododendron bush. It was a far cry from the glass and steel mansion on Lake Washington. There was no lake view, there was no smart home system, but there was also no shouting. There was no fear. "I like it here," Mia said, climbing onto the half-inflated mattress. "It is quiet." "Yes," I said, tucking a blanket around her. "It is very quiet." We ordered a pepperoni pizza from a local place. We ate it sitting on the floor of the living room, using paper towels as plates. For the first time in her life, Mia ate with her hands without being corrected for her table manners. She laughed when a string of cheese got stuck on her chin. I watched her, and I felt a physical loosening in my chest. The knot of anxiety that had lived under my ribcage for 5 years began to unravel. After Mia fell asleep, clutching her rabbit, I walked into the small kitchen. I opened a bottle of Pinot Grigio I had bought at the grocery store for $12. It tasted sharp and acidic, nothing like the vintage wines Julian kept in his cellar. But to me, it tasted like victory. I sat down at the small laminate table and opened my laptop. It was time. I didn't need the 72-hour timer anymore. I was safe. Mia was safe. Julian was occupied. I logged into the SEC's Office of the Whistleblower portal. The interface was bureaucratic and dry, a stark contrast to the flashy, neon-soaked world Julian was currently streaming from. I clicked on Submit a Tip, Form TCR. Tip, complaint, or referral. I filled in the fields with the precision of a surgeon. Name of entity Thorne and Company. Type of violation Ponzi scheme. Financial statement fraud. False filings. Money laundering. Tax evasion. Violator. Julian Thorne. Then came the attachments. I dragged and dropped the files I had extracted from his hard drive. Exhibit A, the shadow books, a spreadsheet showing the real cash flow versus the investor reports. It showed clearly that the revenue was actually just recycled capital from new investors. Exhibit B, the shell game, the invoices from Luna Marketing Solutions, and the corresponding wire transfers to accounts controlled by Bella. Exhibit C, the forgery log. The metadata analysis proved that the signatures of Aurora Waverly on all legal compliance documents were created by Julian's user account at times when I was demonstrably elsewhere at pediatrician appointments, at the grocery store, or asleep. I included the graphologist's report I had commissioned secretly, confirming the signatures were digital duplications, not original strokes. And finally, the nail in the coffin. Exhibit D. The divorce settlement agreement. I scanned the signed document I had brought home from court that morning. I highlighted the comprehensive indemnification and assumption of liability clause on page 47. I typed a brief narrative in the description box. To the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, my ex-husband, Julian Thorne, is currently soliciting $20 million in Series C funding based on fraudulent financial statements. As of this morning, per the attached court order, Mr. Thorne has legally assumed sole and exclusive liability for all past and future financial conduct of the company. He has waived his right to an independent audit and affirmed under oath that he is the sole operator of the business. The attached evidence demonstrates a systemic pattern of fraud orchestrated by Mr. Thorne to defraud investors and evade taxes. I am providing this information voluntarily and request entry into the whistleblower program. My finger hovered over the submit button. I checked my phone one last time. Bella had posted a new photo. It was a selfie of her and Julian in the back of the McLaren, presumably leaving the club. Julian was looking at her with a glazed, heavy-lidded expression. Bella was holding up a middle finger to the camera. The caption read, "Bye-bye, loser, a new era starts now, winning power couple." I looked at the number of likes. 2,000 people had double-tapped that image in 10 minutes. 2,000 people cheering for the villains. They thought I was the loser. They thought I was sitting in this cheap apartment crying over a man who treated me like furniture. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. "Enjoy the ride, Bella," I whispered. "I hope you saved some of that consulting fee for bail money." I pressed submit. The screen refreshed. A green banner appeared at the top. "Submission successful. Thank you for your information. Reference number TCR-2024-89201. It was done. The digital packet was now sitting on a secure server in Washington, D.C. Within 24 hours, an analyst would flag it. Within 48 hours, given the size of the fraud and the imminent Series C funding round, a specialized task force would be assembled. They wouldn't just knock on his door, they would kick it down. I closed the laptop. I took a sip of my cheap wine. I walked over to the window and looked out at the dark parking lot. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, revealing a sliver of the moon. I thought about Julian, right now. He was probably ordering another bottle. He was probably telling Bella how smart he was for getting me to sign that agreement. He was probably laughing about how he had dodged the audit. He had no idea that he was already dead. He was a walking ghost, haunting a life that no longer belonged to him. I felt a vibration in my pocket. Another notification. It was an email from Elias. "Did you send it?" I typed back 2 words. "It is away." He replied instantly. "Go to sleep. Aurora, the government works slow, but they grind exceedingly fine. You have done your part." I turned off my phone. I didn't put it on silent. I turned it completely off. I didn't want to see the notifications. I didn't want to see the hate comments from Julian's fan club. I didn't want to be reachable. For the next few days, I would just be a mom. I would take Mia to the park. We would get ice cream. We would unpack boxes. I washed my face in the small bathroom sink. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the terrified housewife who hid in the pantry. She wasn't the sharp-edged analyst in a power suit. She was something new, something forged in fire. I was free. I climbed into the air mattress beside Mia. It squeaked as I settled in. She stirred, throwing a small arm across my chest. "Mama," she mumbled in her sleep. "I am here," I whispered. "I am right here." I closed my eyes. For 5 years, I had slept with one eye open, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for Julian's mood to shift, waiting for the financial house of cards to collapse on top of us. Tonight, the only thing dropping was the hammer of justice, and I wasn't underneath it. I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind of sleep that only comes to the innocent or the meticulously prepared. The clock was ticking. 72 hours. Tick, tick, tick. The world didn't end with a whimper. It ended with the shriek of sirens and the breaking of glass. 48 hours after I signed the divorce papers, the illusion of Julian Thorne's empire shattered on live television. I wasn't there to see it in person. I was sitting in the break room of a small logistics firm in Kent, Washington, where I had just started a temporary job as a data entry clerk. It was a humble job, the kind Julian would have sneered at, but it paid $18 an hour, and nobody asked me to sign fraudulent tax returns. The break room TV was usually tuned to a daytime talk show, but when I walked in with my bagged lunch, the screen was flashing red. Breaking news. "Turn it up," the receptionist, a woman named Linda, said, pointing her fork at the screen. "Isn't that the guy from the magazines, the one who looks like a movie star?" I looked up, and there he was. The camera was shaking, filming from a helicopter circling above the Thorne and Company headquarters in downtown Seattle. FBI agents in blue windbreakers were swarming the entrance like ants. They were carrying boxes, dozens of them, white bankers' boxes labeled evidence. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Fed raid at Thorne Company CEO, accused of $50 million fraud scheme." My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just took a bite of my apple and watched the inevitable unfold. Authorities executed a search warrant at 6 a.m. this morning. The reporter's voice was breathless, fighting against the wind. The Securities and Exchange Commission has simultaneously filed a civil complaint alleging that Thorne and Company has been operating a massive Ponzi scheme masked as a fintech startup. Sources say the company has been soliciting millions from investors while having virtually no actual revenue. The scene cut to the street level. Employees were being escorted out of the building, looking confused and terrified. I recognized some of them young developers who believed in the vision, sales reps who thought they were selling the future. I felt a pang of sympathy for them. They were collateral damage in Julian's war against reality. "Where is he?" Linda asked, chewing her salad. "Where is the CEO?" "We are getting reports now," the reporter continued, pressing a hand to her earpiece, "that Julian Thorne was apprehended at SeaTac International Airport less than an hour ago. He was reportedly attempting to board a flight to the Maldives with his associate, Bella Luna." The screen cut to footage shot by a bystander's cell phone. It was shaky and grainy, but the image was unmistakable. Julian was standing near the first-class check-in counter. He wasn't wearing his Armani suit. He was wearing a tracksuit and sunglasses, trying to look inconspicuous and failing miserably. 2 federal agents had him pinned against the counter. One was twisting his arm behind his back. The sunglasses had fallen off. His face was pale, a ghostly white that made his tan look like dirt. His mouth was open in a silent scream of indignation. I saw the handcuffs click. The silver flash was brighter than the Rolex he used to wear. "Get your hands off me." The audio from the phone picked up his voice, shrill and panicked. "Do you know who I am? I am Julian Thorne. This is a mistake. Call my lawyer." "You have the right to remain silent," an agent said, pushing his head down as they marched him toward the exit. "I suggest you use it." Behind him, Bella was screaming. She wasn't fighting. She was tantruming. She was kicking at a TSA agent. Her designer luggage sprawled open on the floor, spilling bikinis and cash stacks of $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands onto the linoleum. "I didn't do anything," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He told me it was legal. I'm just the marketing director. I don't know anything about the money." I took another bite of my apple. The crisp, tart flavor exploded in my mouth. "Wow," Linda said, shaking her head. "He looks guilty as hell. Running to the Maldives, that is a classic villain move." "It sure is," I said quietly. "Did you know him?" Linda asked, glancing at me. "You said you used to live in Seattle." I looked at the screen, freezing the image of Julian being shoved into the back of a black SUV. "I used to know a guy like that," I said. "A long time ago." Later that afternoon, the legal fallout began, and it was exactly as Elias and I had predicted. I followed the updates on my phone during my breaks. Sterling, Julian's shark of a lawyer, held an impromptu press conference on the courthouse steps. He looked disheveled. He was sweating. He knew his retainer was about to be frozen along with Julian's assets. My client is innocent, Sterling declared, though his voice lacked its usual boom. Mr. Thorne is a visionary who has been misled by bad actors within his own organization. We believe that the financial irregularities, if they exist, were the work of other officers who had access to the accounts. He was trying to pivot. He was trying to frame me. We will be looking closely at the role of the former chief legal officer, Sterling continued, laying the groundwork. It is our understanding that Mr. Thorne focused on the product, while others handled the compliance. I smiled. Go ahead, Sterling. Walk right into the trap. Less than an hour later, the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Washington issued a statement. They didn't mince words. We have reviewed the defense's claims regarding third-party culpability, the prosecutor said, standing behind a podium with the Department of Justice seal. However, the evidence provided to our office, including sworn affidavits and recent court filings from Mr. Thorne's own divorce proceedings, contradicts this narrative. The prosecutor held up a piece of paper. Even from the small screen of my phone, I recognized the 12-point font. I recognized page 47. 3 days ago, the prosecutor said, his voice dry and lethal. Mr. Thorne signed a legal settlement in King County Superior Court. In this document, he explicitly affirmed that he was the sole operator of Thorne and Company. He waived his right to an independent audit because, in his own words, he knew the business better than anyone. Furthermore, he voluntarily assumed full personal liability for all financial conduct of the company, past and present, specifically indemnifying his former spouse. The reporters flashed their cameras. The sound was like a swarm of cicadas. The government takes Mr. Thorne at his word, the prosecutor finished, a small, grim smile touching his lips. If he claims he is the only one in charge, we will charge him as the only one in charge. I imagined Julian sitting in a holding cell, watching this on a small TV bolted to the wall. I imagined the moment of realization crashing down on him. He had fought so hard to keep the company. He had threatened to take my daughter to keep the company. He had bullied, lied, and manipulated to ensure he owned 100% of the company. And now, that ownership was the chain around his neck. If he had been less greedy, if he had given me half the shares, if he had let me into the boardroom, he could have plausibly argued that I was complicit. He could have dragged me down with him. I would be sitting in that cell right next to him, facing 10 years for conspiracy. But his ego wouldn't allow it. He wanted all the credit, so he got all the blame. It was the ultimate irony. His narcissism, the very thing that made him a monster, was the exact thing that saved me. The news cycle moved fast. By the evening, the focus shifted to Bella. She didn't have Julian's loyalty. She didn't have his vision. As soon as the handcuffs were on, she flipped. TMZ leaked a video of her interrogation. She was sitting in a metal chair, mascara running down her face, sobbing into a tissue. It was all him, she wailed. He made me set up shell companies. He told me it was for tax optimization. I didn't know it was laundering. I'm 24. I don't know how to launder money. But you spent the money, didn't you, Ms. Luna? An agent asked off camera. You bought a Patek Philippe watch, with funds traced directly from the pension accounts of elderly investors. You posted it on Instagram. I thought it was a gift. You are the registered agent for Luna Marketing Solutions, the agent said, sliding a document across the table. You signed the invoices. You accepted the wire transfers. That makes you a co-conspirator, not a victim. I watched the clip from the safety of my new living room. Mia was playing on the floor with a puzzle. Bella had wanted my life. She had wanted my husband, my house, my status. She had mocked me for being a loser in a Volvo. Now, she was going to get the full experience of being Mrs. Thorne, the public humiliation, the financial ruin, the legal nightmare. She had stolen a curse and thought it was a blessing. I closed my laptop. The news was starting to repeat itself. Ponzi scheme, 50 million, betrayal. I felt a strange sense of hollowness. I expected to feel triumphant. I expected to feel like jumping up and down. But revenge, I realized, doesn't feel like a party. It feels like relief. It feels like setting down a heavy backpack after hiking for 5 years. I looked around my small, beige apartment. It wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't a mansion. But it was clean. It was honest. And it was mine. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Arthur. Sterling just called me. He wanted to know if we would support a motion to void the settlement agreement based on mental duress. I typed back. "What did you tell him?" Arthur replied. I told him that his client seemed very sound of mind when he was drinking Dom Perignon and live-streaming his victory 2 nights ago. The agreement stands. You are clear. Aurora. I put the phone down. "Mommy," Mia asked, holding up a puzzle piece. "Where does this one go?" I sat down on the floor beside her. I looked at the piece. It was a small, blue corner of the sky. "It goes right here," I said, snapping it into place. Right at the top, where the storm is clearing. The empire had fallen. The king was in chains. The mistress was in ruins. And the queen. The queen was sitting on the floor of a rental apartment in Renton, Washington, helping her daughter build a picture of a lighthouse, while the world outside burned itself clean. The Federal Detention Center in SeaTac does not smell like fear. It smells like industrial cleaner and stale recycled air. It smells like a place where time has curdled and stopped flowing. I walked through the metal detector for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The guard, a heavy-set woman with tired eyes, waved the wand over my torso. I was not wearing an underwire bra. I was not wearing jewelry. I was not wearing the charcoal blazer of the defeated wife or the beige cardigan of the invisible woman. Today, I was wearing a dress the color of deep emerald green. It was silk. It moved when I moved. It was the color of money. Yes, but more importantly, it was the color of life. It was a color Julian had always forbidden me to wear because he said it clashed with his aesthetic. "You are clear," the guard said, motioning toward the heavy steel door. "Booth 4. It had been 6 months since the raid, 6 months since the sirens, 6 months of silence. Julian had been denied bail. The judge, citing his attempt to flee to the Maldives and the sheer scale of the $50 million fraud, deemed him a massive flight risk. He had spent the last 180 days in administrative segregation, separated from the general population for his own protection because high-profile white-collar criminals often became targets. I sat down on the metal stool in booth 4. The glass partition in front of me was thick, scratched, and smudged with the fingerprints of 1,000 desperate conversations. I folded my hands on the ledge and waited. When the door on the other side opened, I almost didn't recognize the man who walked in. Julian Thorne had always been a creature of maintenance. His hair was always styled, his skin exfoliated, his suits tailored to hide the slight softness around his midsection. He was a man constructed of layers. The man who sat down opposite me had been peeled. He was gaunt. His cheekbones jutted out like razors under skin that looked gray and papery. His hair, once his pride, was thinning and greasy, clinging to his scalp in patches. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that hung off his frame like a tent. But it was his eyes that stopped my breath. The arrogance was gone. The visionary light was extinguished. In its place was a frantic, vibrating terror. He looked like an animal that had been caught in a trap and had chewed off its own leg, only to realize it was still stuck. He picked up the phone receiver. His hand was shaking so badly the cord rattled against the glass. I picked up my receiver. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was calm. It was not the whisper of a victim. It was the steady tone of a judge. "You knew," he rasped. His voice was a dry, cracked thing. He hadn't used it for a speech or a pitch in months. "You knew the whole time." "I do not know what you are talking about," I said, leaning back slightly. "Do not lie to me," he screamed, slamming his fist against the ledge. The guard behind him took a step forward, hand on his baton. Julian flinched. Shrinking back into himself, he lowered his voice to a hiss. "The settlement. The clause. Page 47. You knew. You set me up." I looked at him. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes. "I gave you exactly what you asked for, Julian," I said. You wanted the company. You wanted the credit. You wanted to be the sole owner. I just ensured the paperwork reflected your reality. It was a trap, he spat. You planted the seeds. You made me think you were stupid. You made me think you were greedy for the audit so I would panic. You manipulated me. I manipulated you. I let a small, cold laugh escape. Julian, a trap only works if the animal walks into it. I didn't force you to sign that waiver. I didn't force you to decline the audit. I didn't force you to scream at your lawyer to stop nickeling and diming me. He froze. His eyes widened. How do you know I said that to Sterling? Because, I said, I know you. I know that your ego is a hungry ghost. It needs to be fed constantly. You could not stand the idea of me, the boring, risk-averse wife, having a peek behind the curtain. You had to be the smartest person in the room. And the smartest person in the room always signs the deal that gives him everything. Doesn't he? He stared at me, his mouth working silently. He was processing the shift in power. For 8 years, he had been the sun, and I had been the shadow. Now, he was in a concrete box, and I was the one casting the shade. Why? He whispered. Why didn't you just leave? Why did you have to destroy me? You destroyed yourself. Julian, I corrected him. You stole $50 million. You defrauded pensioners. You laundered money through your mistress. All I did was turn on the lights. He flinched at the mention of the money. He leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging it up. The desperation in his eyes shifted, morphing into a clumsy attempt at charm. It was painful to watch, like seeing a broken marionette try to dance. Aurora, he said, his voice softening, trying to find that old, hypnotic cadence. Look, okay, I made mistakes. I flew too close to the sun. But we were a team once. Remember Pioneer Square? The dream. I remember, I said. I remember I paid for the appetizers. We have a daughter, he pressed on. Ignoring my comment, we have Mia. She needs her father. She needs me to come home. This trial. Sterling says it is going to be a bloodbath. The feds are asking for 20 years. 20 years. Aurora, Mia will be 25 when I get out. She will be fine, I said. She won't be fine without resources, he hissed. Listen to me. I have assets that they didn't find. Crypto wallets, offshore accounts in the Cook Islands. Sterling can't access them because they are watching him. But you could. I stared at him, even now, in prison, facing 2 decades of incarceration. He was trying to make me an accomplice. You want me to launder money for you? I asked. I want you to hire a better lawyer, he begged. Sterling is an idiot. He let me sign that agreement. I need a specialist. I need a defense team that costs $5 million. If you access the wallets, if you get the money, I can fight this. I can get it reduced to 5 years. For Mia, please, Aurora, do it for Mia. I looked at the man I had married. I looked for a shred of decency, a chaotic atom of love for his child. I found nothing. I found only a man who viewed his daughter as a leverage point and his wife as a tool. You still do not get it, I said, shaking my head slowly. You think I am the same woman who sat in your kitchen and cried because you didn't like my cooking. You think I am the parking brake. I reached into my purse. The guard watched me closely. But I moved slowly. I pulled out a single photograph. I pressed it against the glass. It was a picture of Mia. She was standing on the front porch of a small rented townhouse in a suburb nobody wrote magazine articles about. She was wearing a backpack with a cartoon dinosaur on it. She was grinning a wide, gap-toothed, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She looked light. She looked unburdened. She is happy. Julian, I said. She started kindergarten last week. She has friends. She sleeps through the night. She doesn't ask about you. She doesn't ask why Daddy is shouting. She doesn't ask why Daddy is always gone. Julian stared at the photo. He didn't look at Mia's smile. He looked at the background. That house, he sneered. the old venom leaking through. "It looks like a shack. You are raising my daughter in a shack." "I am raising her in a home," I said, putting the photo away. "And unlike your penthouse, nobody is going to come and put caution tape across the front door." "I can fix this," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I am Julian Thorne. I am a genius. I just need time. Aurora, give me the money. I know you have something. You liquidated the furniture. Didn't you? You sold the jewelry. Use it, help me." I stood up. The movement was final. "I do not have your money, Julian," I said, "and I do not need it. Do you know why?" He stared up at me, his eyes wet with rage and fear. "Because I have a job," I said. "A real job. I am working as a senior risk officer for a logistics firm. They hired me last month." "You?" he laughed. A wet, hacking sound. "You have been a housewife for 5 years. Who would hire you?" "They hired me," I said, leaning down so my face was level with his, separated only by the inch of bulletproof glass. Because during my interview, I walked them through the forensic audit of Thorne and Company. I showed them exactly how a genius CEO hid $50 million in debt, and exactly how a simple housewife found it using nothing but metadata and basic arithmetic. Julian went still. His face went slack. "I told them," I continued, savoring every syllable, "that if I could dismantle a sophisticated Ponzi scheme from my kitchen table while raising a toddler, I could probably handle their supply chain risks. You," he whispered, "you used me." "I used the skills you told me were useless," I said. "You called me old-fashioned. You called me a worrier. You said I didn't understand the new economy, but you forgot one thing. Julian, gravity is old-fashioned, math is old-fashioned, and eventually, everything that goes up without a foundation must come down." "I will kill you," he whispered. It was a hollow threat, toothless and sad. "When I get out, I will destroy you." "You are not getting out," I said. I picked up my purse. I smoothed the silk of my green dress. "You wanted to win. Julian, that was always your obsession. Winning the deal, winning the argument, winning the divorce." I looked around the bleak, gray room. "Well, congratulations," I said. "You won. You wanted the company. You got it. You wanted the debts. They are yours. You wanted the sole responsibility. You have it. You signed the paper. You claimed the prize." I turned toward the door. "Aurora," he screamed. "Aurora, come back. Do not walk away from me. I made you. You are nothing without me." I stopped. I didn't turn around. I just spoke to the steel door in front of me. "I was someone before I met you," I said, "and I am someone after you. The only time I was nothing was when I was with you. Aurora." He was slamming the phone receiver against the glass now. I could hear the dull thuds. I could hear the guards shouting orders. I could hear the shuffle of boots as they moved in to restrain him. I signaled to the guard in the booth. He buzzed the door open. I walked out into the corridor. The heavy steel door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Julian's screaming. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. I walked back through the metal detector. I collected my driver's license from the front desk. "Have a nice day, ma'am," the guard said, handing me my ID. "I will," I said. "I really will." I walked out of the prison and into the parking lot. The sky was a brilliant, aching blue. The air smelled of rain and pine trees and gasoline. It smelled like the world. I got into my car, not the Volvo, but a sensible, reliable sedan I had bought with my first 3 paychecks. I put the key in the ignition. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't feel the need to scream. The catharsis wasn't an explosion. It wasn't a firework display. It was the quiet, steady hum of an engine starting. It was the knowledge that for the first time in 5 years, the man who had controlled my every breath was now sitting in a box that I had locked, holding a key he had forged himself. I checked my watch. It was 2 o'clock. Mia got out of school at 3. I had just enough time to stop and buy her an ice cream, chocolate, her favorite. I pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the gray fortress of the Federal Detention Center behind me. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there for me anymore. The road ahead was open, and for the first time, I was the one driving. Time has a way of smoothing over the roughest edges of our lives, much like the ocean waves smooth the jagged glass found on the shore. It has been 2 years since the heavy steel doors of the federal prison slammed shut behind Julian Thorne. The trial was exactly the bloodbath that he had feared. The federal prosecutors did not need to rely on theatrics because they had the math, and as I have always said, math does not lie. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. They returned with a verdict of guilty on all 27 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Judge Harrison, the same judge who had raised her eyebrows at my divorce settlement, presided over the criminal sentencing. She looked at Julian, a man who had shrunk inside his ill-fitting suit, and she told him that arrogance was not a defense. She sentenced him to 20 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He will be 55 years old when he tastes freedom again. The prime of his life, the years he thought he would spend ruling the world, will be spent in a 6x8 cell. As for Bella, she learned the hard way that being an accessory is not a glamorous role. She avoided prison by testifying against Julian, turning on him with the viciousness of a cornered animal, but she did not escape consequence. She received 5 years of probation and a restitution order she will likely be paying off for the rest of her life. But the social sentence was worse. In the age of the internet, she became a meme, a cautionary tale. She was fired from every job she applied for once the background check came back. The last I heard, she had moved back to her parents' house in Ohio, far away from the high society circles she had tried so desperately to infiltrate. But I do not spend my days thinking about them. They are ghosts, and I am very much alive. My life today looks nothing like the glossy, curated perfection Julian tried to force upon me. It is messy, it is loud, and it is real. I returned to the workforce, not just as an employee, but as a force of nature. The logistics firm promoted me twice in the first year, but my real passion, the work that wakes me up in the morning with a fire in my belly, happens after hours. I started a consulting firm called the Waverly Group. We specialize in financial defense for women going through high-conflict divorces. I sit across the table from women who look exactly like I did 3 years ago, scared, diminished, convinced they are stupid because a man told them they were. I look at their tax returns, I look at their bank statements, and I teach them how to find the truth. There is a profound healing in watching the light come back into a woman's eyes when she realizes she is not helpless, when she realizes that the complex business deal her husband told her not to worry about is actually just a spreadsheet she can understand. I am arming an army of Auroras, one forensic audit at a time. Mia and I live in a small craftsman bungalow in West Seattle. It is about a quarter of the size of the lake house. The floors creak. The heater rattles, but it is ours. The most important part of our home is the garden. Julian hated flowers. He called them visual clutter. He preferred harsh lines, concrete, and sterile landscaping that required expensive maintenance crews. He wanted nature to look like a corporate lobby. My backyard is a riot of chaos. I planted hydrangeas that spill over the walkways. I planted wild roses that climb the fences. I planted sunflowers that grow 6 feet tall and nod their heavy heads in the wind. On weekends, Mia and I dig in the dirt with our bare hands. We get mud under our fingernails. We track soil into the kitchen. And we laugh. We laugh so much. That is the sound I miss the most. The sound of unedited, unapproved joy. 6 months ago, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from the United States Treasury. Under the Dodd-Frank Act, the Securities and Exchange Commission is authorized to provide monetary awards to eligible individuals who come forward with high quality, original information that leads to an enforcement action in which over $1 million in sanctions is ordered. The award range is between 10% and 30% of the money collected. Julian's fraud was massive. The government seized everything: the hidden crypto wallets, the offshore accounts in the Cook Islands that I told them how to find, the liquidation of the assets he had tried to hide. The check inside the envelope was for an amount that made my knees weak. It was not Julian money. It was not stolen. It was earned. It was the government's way of saying thank you for stopping a crime that could have hurt thousands more people. I did not buy a McLaren. I did not buy a Patek Philippe watch. I took that check and I fully funded a trust for Mia. She will never have to worry about college. She will never have to stay in a job she hates or a marriage that hurts her because she cannot afford to leave. I bought her freedom, and then I donated a significant portion to a legal aid fund for victims of financial abuse. Money, I have learned, is not evil. It is just energy. In Julian's hands, it was a weapon used to control and silence. In my hands, it is a tool used to build and protect. Last Tuesday, I met Elias Vance for coffee. He has retired from teaching, but he still wears the same tweed jacket. We sat at a small table near the Pike Place Market, watching the tourists dodge the rain. He stirred his black coffee, looking at me with that same sharp, assessing gaze. "You look different," he said. "I am older." I smiled. "No," Elias shook his head. "You look solid. When you came to me in the library that day, you looked like smoke, like you might blow away if someone opened a window. Now, you look like stone. Is that a good thing?" I asked. "It is the best thing," he said. "You know, Aurora, in all my years of law, I have never seen a strategy executed quite like that. The gray rock, the liability clause, it should be in textbooks. It was survival. Elias," I said. "Perhaps," he said, taking a sip. "But most people survive by running away. You survived by standing still and letting the train hit the person who tied himself to the tracks. We didn't toast with champagne. We toasted with paper cups of drip coffee. It was the most satisfying drink of my life." "Do you ever feel guilty?" Elias asked me. A question only a mentor could ask, about not warning him. I looked out at the gray water of the Puget Sound. I thought about the way Julian had looked at me when he told me I was nothing. I thought about the way he had used Mia as a bargaining chip. I thought about the signature he had forged in my name. "No," I said softly. "I do not feel guilty. I gave him a choice, every single day. I gave him a choice. I asked for the audit. He refused. I asked for fairness. He refused. I warned him about the math. He laughed. A warning is only useful to someone who is willing to listen. Julian was only listening to himself." Elias nodded, satisfied. "Justice usually is not poetic, Aurora, but in your case, it rhymed." This morning, before I sat down to write this final chapter, I drove to the beach. It was a blustery day, the kind of weather that keeps the tourists away. I walked down to the water's edge, my shoes sinking into the wet sand. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I stood there and looked at the horizon. For a long time, I thought that revenge was about making the other person suffer. I thought it was about anger. I thought it was about watching them burn. But as I stood there, breathing in the salt air, I realized that I was wrong. Real revenge is not about them at all. It is about you. Revenge is waking up in a house that feels safe. Revenge is having a job where your brain is respected. Revenge is raising a daughter who knows her own worth. Revenge is the peace of knowing that while they are rotting in a cage of their own making, you are out here, feeling the wind on your face. Julian took the company. He took the debt. He took the shame. I took the one thing he never valued. I took myself. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves. I am 34 years old. I have a scar on my heart, but it has healed over, tougher than the skin around it. I am not a victim. I am not a survivor. I am the architect of my own liberation. The wind picked up, colder now, but I didn't turn back to the car. I stayed there, occupying my space, breathing my air. I am not Mrs. Thorne. I am not the parking brake. I am not the silent partner. My name is Aurora Waverly, and I have never been more happy to be exactly who I am. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story, it is this. Do not let anyone tell you that you are small. Do not let anyone convince you that your silence is weakness. And when the person who tries to break you demands everything when they demand your dignity, your future, and your voice, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is smile, hand them the pen, and let them sign their own destruction. Sometimes, you have to lose the battle to win the war. And sometimes, the best way to fight a fire is to let it burn itself out, and then plant a garden in the ashes. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being a witness to my truth. I hope you found some strength in these words. I would love to know where you are listening from. So please drop a comment below and tell me your city or country. Let us build a community of people who refuse to be underestimated. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the channel Scarlet Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button so this story can reach more people who might need to hear it. From my garden to yours, stay strong, stay smart, and never forget your worth.